Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Work in Progress. We've decided on the name, it's called Work in Progress now. Now in glorious HD because I got a new camera and looks a lot better right now I think. I actually already had recorded an episode. It was a different subject entirely, but I wasn't too happy with it. A new camera came in the mail and I figured what the hell, might as well do a new episode, especially because there's a subject I wanted to talk about. This entire thing actually started in CS:GO. I don't know if some of you know Thorin. I'll probably put the link either in a annotation somewhere here on YouTube or in the description below. Thorin started a very interesting conversation in CS:GO. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but the topic of the conversation is very interesting, which is should every gun in Counter-Strike be viable? And this depends, of course, on what you consider viable, what your definition of viable is, right? So I'd like to bring that discussion to SMITE. Should every god, every character, every item be viable? Well, what does viable mean, first of all, right? The definition of viable varies wildly, and not all of them are particularly useful. So, like, the first one is, what is viable? It has things are viable if they're played more or less the same amount as everything else. No, that's not. That's you can't do it that way because I guarantee you, if you could make the game 100% balanced, like you somehow discovered a way to balance the game perfectly and to demonstrate that it was perfectly balanced, you would still have characters that were more played than others. You'd still have characters that have more of a niche appeal, and you'd still have characters that are just more interesting for the majority. Characters like Thor, for example, will, generally speaking, be played more than characters like, say, Arachne. This and nothing to do with their power level. Like if they were all perfectly balanced, and yes, maybe you specifically like Arachne more, but in general, Thor's character design and his kit and the way he plays is more appealing to most people than a character like Arachne. So this is a guarantee. If you could somehow make the game perfectly balanced, they wouldn't be played the same amount. There will still be characters they would be preferred over others. So you can't use that definition. The other one, and this one this one kind of galls me, is then things need to have the same win rate, 50% win rate, or yeah, 50% win rate, so everybody has the same one. No, this is a misunderstanding of statistics. Win rate is irrelevant for balance because there are way too many variables that you don't control. Like for win rate to be viable as a way to measure a character's balance, you'd have to have everyone playing the perfect style for every character with every character. You'd have to have everybody would have to be at the same exact skill level, which by itself is already renders the definition null. People are not at the same skill level. But more than that, they would have to be at the exact same skill level on every character, and they'd have to be playing the perfect style for that character. And so it completely throws the metric off balance because you have characters that, like for example, Thanatos. Thanatos is a character that either is really good or is really trash because you have to play him a very specific way, and if you don't, it can crash and burn horribly. The 50% win rate Thanatos, and then once in the LCS last year, and then once in a while someone brings out Thanatos and they know how to play him and they play him right in the right composition, in the right way, and he blows everybody up, and everyone goes, "Oh my God, Thanatos is actually a character that works." So it doesn't just depend on you playing it. It depends on how your opponents play against it, because you don't just have to. That's something people forget. You don't just have to know how to play your character. You have to know how to play against the other character as well. A good example of this is Hades. Now, Hades, according I think to Bart, IRS Bart, Hades has always had one of the highest win rates in the game for like over a year or something like that. But you do have a very specific counterplay to Hades. But if you don't play well against Hades, if you don't know how to play against Hades, he will destroy you. He will destroy you, he will destroy your game, and that's it. Because, like, the number one mistake, that's just the more common, there's more to Hades than that. Like, if you don't have any way to get out of his ultimate and you still stay in range, or if you stay in the middle of a lot of enemies or the minion wave, he'll nuke you. He'll absolutely destroy you. But if you do know how to play against him, then it changes completely. On top of that, you have the thing that we talked about, for example, before, which is Hades wasn't for the longest time was not a particularly popular character, which means popular characters are the characters generally that you see in the in the SPL. Did I call it LCS earlier? Sorry, in the SPL or in other relevant big events, or that are just being sort of the flavor of the month. So a lot of people are going to pick them up because they're the flavor of the month. That's what it means, right? People think that, oh, this character is overpowered or whatever, so everybody plays them. Even people that have no idea how to play that character will pick him up, and so they'll generally have more mixed results depending on what you need to play against them, which is something else. So Hades was a character that has a very specific counter style. You have to know how to play against him, and because he wasn't very popular, a good portion of the people playing him were probably just the people that knew when when they should play him and how to play him very well, because they weren't people that brought out the Hades because, oh, well, why not, I don't know what to pick, I'm going to pick Hades because he's the flavor of the month. No, it were people like, oh, I really like Hades, I play Hades a lot. Or people that were, well, I know exactly when I should pick that character and it's right now. So win rate at the end of the day, it's not a very good metric. Not to mention that because of the thing we mentioned above, because you will never have the same equal play rate in all the characters. Some characters will be more popular. That also means that some characters will be better represented in mastery. There's going to be, for example, a good example is Thor. Thor in Smite, Lee Sin in League of Legends. They're characters that for the longest, not only are they really cool to play to the majority of players, they have a very general appeal, but they're characters that for the longest time were solid. Now, a lot of people will say underpowered, overpowered, whatever, but for the longest period of time, they were at the very least usable. So you have a lot of players, a lot of pro players that put a lot of time into learning a character that was A, interesting, and B, usable. And so obviously you have players like the Gars, where you don't give him Thor, and there's nothing to do where Thor stands in the balance, and everything to do with the fact that you do not want Thor Gars running around getting 13-2 and utterly ruining your game because he's just that good with that character. So win rate out. Win rate has nothing to do with viability. Win rate is a good starting point for viability. If you have a character with a really high win rate or a really low win rate, it's worth looking into to see why that's happening. But it by itself doesn't mean anything. The other thing that people mention in viability is that, well, then all characters should be good at everything all the time. It is closer to what I think. This is all just my view of it. It's closer to what I would say is viability, but not really, because you can't have characters being good at everything all the time without simply homogenizing the characters, without literally making them basically the same thing. It's just, to have interesting designs, you generally have to make characters that are better at some things and worse at other things, and that naturally polarizes characters. That moves them more into a niche roles and more specific roles, and that's okay. That's actually interesting to have a character like, oh, we want a split pusher, let's get Apollo, instead of, hey, this is Apollo, he's good at everything, why not pick Apollo? They also split pushes, why not? And because you have that, like, the only way to have every character be good at everything all the time is to homogenize the characters and make it so they're all basically very slight variations of the exact same thing. Which is, if any of you play Street Fighter, it's a little bit like the Shotos, although the Shotos have more differences than some people who don't know the game give them credit for. But that is a little bit what, if you've seen Ryu and Ken, they're very similar, and despite the fact that they're different characters, they're still different versions of the exact same thing. And the only way to have all the roster in Smite with his 64, 65 characters and growing, I doubt it's gonna end with less than 100 characters. In order to make 100 characters good at everything, and then like another 100 or 200 items, you basically have to make them all be very, very small variations of the same thing. You have like a lane clear, a mobility skill, a nuke, an ultimate which is also damage, and then just make slight variations. Oh, this one does a little better dash, and this one has a little better lane clear, and this one has a little better nuke or whatever. But it's not particularly interesting when you want characters like say Sylvanas, which regardless of where you stand on his balance, is an interesting design. It's different. It's one of the most different and interesting guardians just on the design of his kit alone. I'm not talking about balance here. Then he's naturally gonna have some strengths and some weaknesses. Like specifically, he has no mobility. He's really good at pulling you and hard engage if he gets you, but it doesn't have a lot to run away, for example. So that naturally creates characters that are better at some things, worse at other things, and that's okay. So it's not necessary for every character to be good at everything all the time, or every item to be selectable at all the time. You can just go, oh, doesn't even matter what. Why even have different items at that point? Like if you just pick any item and it's good, it's always a good option. No, when we're talking about viability, at least in my opinion, you have comments below. Feel free to disagree. When it comes to viability, the important thing is to have a reason to pick it at some point. A god, a character, a strategy, if you want. There needs to be one reason, at least, to pick that character. A niche, a specific tactic that's valuable, and that's very important, that's useful, that's valuable. It's not, oh, this character is really good at taking the first order side turret at the 16.5 minute mark if the other laner is standing by the Gold Fury, the opposite Gold Fury, the opposite side of the map, Gold Fury, and that's not valuable. Nobody's going to do that. A good example in a lot of first-person shooters is shotguns. Shotguns are generally difficult to balance in first-person games because of the general overlap of areas that they do with like submachine guns and rifles. They can do because they cover the closer range, and then the better you make them at longer range, the more they can overlap with other weapons. And so what a lot of gun-based games do is that shotguns end up being useless. They have a slightly faster kill time at close range, but then they're so much worse at everything else that the very, very minute advantage that they give you is just not worth it. So it's the same thing. If you have a character in Smite or an item that's you can say it's marginally better at one thing, but that thing is so not valuable in general. It's so very minute, so very specific, and not useful that you're just not going to use it for anything. And then there's all these other disadvantages. Then it's probably not a viable item. Like the one I'm thinking about right now is it's not brutalizer. I forgot the name. It's the one item that's the same as Brawler's Beat Stick. It's almost in every aspect the same as Brawler's Beat Stick. Has the same power, the same penetration, and I think it has a very similar price. But the difference is the passive. Brawler's Beat Stick reduces healing in 40%, and that one gives you, if I remember correctly, attack speed for every time you, for a few seconds, like 2 seconds or something, for every time you attack a turret or a structure, an enemy structure. Like the problem with that is that the items are so similar that, in general, the benefit you get from taking towers down slightly faster, and it is slightly faster. It's not that big of a deal. It's not necessarily better than what you get from the diminished healing, because even if the enemy has no specific healing characters like Ra or Zhonghui or Aphrodite or something, they're always going to have healing in one form or another. They're going to have regeneration on characters, like the natural regeneration, if you like Stone of Gaia, for example, or like Vamana, which is self-regeneration. But even if they don't have those, they're going to have a hunter with high lifesteal. They're going to have... It's not that uncommon to have some lifesteal on your mages, which, yeah, it's not as good as a lifesteal on physical characters, but it's still something. And at the end of the day, it's taking... The ability to take away sustain, it's usually better than getting slightly faster damage on a turret, right? Especially because most of the time you're not going to be in a position where that's going to make much of a difference. Either the enemy can contest your tower siege, and then you want a better ability to fight, or they're not, and you're just going to take the tower for free. And I'm not saying you can't make that item viable. I'm saying that I don't remember how much it costs. You can maybe make it viable by making it considerably cheaper. But you have to have a reason to pick that item that is actually worthwhile, right? So in that sense, yes, every character and every item should be viable. The important thing to remember is that first of all, you have to find the niche in which they're viable. I think a good example where that failed is Nox. Nox, when she came out, was actually, in my opinion, a very interesting character design-wise. She had a few flaws. She had a few things to fix, and the major one was that she had no defense. She had virtually no defense whatsoever, and if anything, more than one enemy piled up on her, she was dead. Which isn't very. And even if it was just one enemy, you had a very very small failsafe, and if that failed, that's it. You're dead. So that's not a very reliable design for a character you want to see in competitive play. So in my opinion, she needed a little bit more of that. What they did on the other, because she was built for sustained fighting, she was built for more sustained engages where she would out DPS other characters. The way they went about it, on the other hand, for the longest time, was to just give her more damage, more guaranteed damage, where you didn't define what she was supposed to be good at. You just made her closer to everything else. Where at the end of the day, she's basically she became just basically just a damage dump, giant DPS damage dealer, where because of her design overlapping with other things, either she's too good and makes other characters not viable, or she's not good enough and basically relevant. And that's one thing that's very important to remember in balance. And one area where I thoroughly disagree with Thorin is what the definition of something that's balanced and what's viable and all that. Because Thorin says that balance, and again, I have a great deal of respect for Thorin. I just disagree with him. That doesn't mean that I think anything bad of him, right? Thorin says something along the lines of, when it comes to balance. Well, right, I had a mental block. Pause here. I'll be right back. Right, sorry about that. I temporarily forgot where I was going with that, and my mind completely just shut down. Sorry about that. We're back. So what I was saying was, Thorin says something along the lines of balance. A character can be overpowered, but if it's still overpowered, but if there's a character that's even more overpowered, that doesn't mean that the other character isn't overpowered, etc. But the thing I'm trying to, in my opinion, balance is relative. Well, like, what does that mean? Imagine character A is really good. Like, he has a skill that one-shots any character, right? Within, let's say Habois with his water cannon suddenly gets buffed to the point where like he one-shots everybody, anything he touches. In the current game, that's stupidly overpowered, that's broken beyond belief, and haha, make the joke that already does that. Right. But that would be incredibly broken and overpowered. But, now, if we take the exact same character, no balance changes, the exact same character to a different world or a different game version where everybody one-shots everybody else with all their skills, suddenly it's not that it's not overpowered, it's actually underpowered because only one of his moves does that and it's short range, right? So we're going back to the fact that, well, balance is relative, right? It's relative to everything else. You have a good case of Zhong and Loki. Like, Zhong for the longest time was considered not viable. It was considered trash tier. Why? Because Zeus was so much better. Scylla, I think, and Poseidon, and there were a couple characters that were so much better than him that he couldn't contest. Like, the thing he did, which was to basically do a very, very large amounts of AoE damage, Zeus did that, but even better at the time. And he couldn't compete with the other characters in any other way. Once those characters were toned down, his value went up by comparison, right? So viability can also be achieved not without touching a character. The important thing is that that character or that item. I'm mostly focusing on characters, but it's the same thing for items. Uh, they have to. It's a design thing first and foremost, because they have to have a very specific use that they do better, and that they better than other things, than the other items or the other characters. If you have that, then if it's underpowered or overpowered, it's just generally a matter of tuning up numbers or tuning down numbers. If you don't have that, what happens is that you end up having overlapping or redundant items. For example, you have a good example is Titan's Bane right now and Executioner. They both serve the same purpose, right? Which is to deal with armor. The problem is, like, the problem is that for basic attack characters, Titan's Bane is redundant. Is that a bad thing? Is it something else? Because Titan's Bane still serves for casters for any character that doesn't basic attack. So you have to ask yourself, it's a decision for high res to go, no, we want this to be a viable choice for basic attack characters, or we don't. If they don't, then it's fine, because there's still a niche that the item serves, because Executioner is no use for anyone that just does skills. For casters like Thor, doesn't serve them anything because they don't get the passive. But if they want it to be viable for that character as well, then they need to find a reason to buy that over Executioner. So basically that's on a summary of everything I said. Basically, viability comes down to having at least one reason, right? A character can be niche, a character can be used for one specific thing, but there has to be at least one reason, one valuable tactic, one utility, that something that character or item brings to the table that nobody else does. At least that's a reason to pick them, right? So, what are you guys' thoughts? What do you think of this week's episode? Is it better? Is it worse? Did I talk too much? Talk too little? Can you understand me fine? Let me know what you guys think. Comments down below. And thanks for everything. For watching.